doing,
How you doing?
Sean? I'm good.
Focus Friday.
It's Focus Friday. It is Focus Friday. And apparently we're blackety blackety black voters, black women. We just rolling out. There it is. With as always, plenty to talk about, and we're gonna do the quick community calendar updates. Talk about community issues and needs, and how outside influence has local impact.
Mm.
Yes, APAC, that's for the whole thing. But the quick community calendar updates. Today is a busy day in the city of Schenectady.
All right.
There is a community barbecue family fun day at the Central Park Pavilion up in Central Park, the jewel of Schenectady, from 4 to 7 p.m., free, open to the public. And our boy Adonis, it is the last Friday of the month.
Yeah.
So Lucid Voices will be at Electric City Barn from 7:30 to 9:30 tonight, featuring Jay Nova.
Oh yeah, Jay Nova.
I really want to go. I really hope I get to go because really, if it's just to say hi to Jay, I do want to be able to go. So that's for just today in the city of Schenectady. In Saratoga, coming up on next Tuesday. Hands off Saratoga, Black Lives Matter, 6 p.m. Congress Park. As we know, that they're coming for Lex again, singling him out in response to some Free Palestine rallies that have happened in Saratoga. So there will be a rally and speak out in Saratoga on Tuesday, July 2nd at 6 p.m. at Congress Park.
They're not just coming for Lex; they're coming for First Amendment rights. They're coming for constitutional rights.
Again.
And we've been down this road. The AG's already investigated the city of Saratoga.
Yep.
And here we are again with them doing much of the same as the last folks that were sitting in those seats.
Yeah, we told them to knock it off, and they said, nope, not gonna. But the last two items for the quick community calendar today, Troy Farmers Market is every Saturday on River Street from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. You never know which local businesses you might find.
Health is wealth.
And the same is true for Schenectady Green Market, but there's every Sunday. So on Saturday, go to Troy. On Sunday, come to Schenectady. Troy's 9 to 2. Schenectady's 10 to 2. We tend to try to share that on our social media pages as well. So if you missed it, go back and look. But that's the quick community calendar update. Let's talk community stuff. What issues do you think the community cares about, Sean?
I mean, there's a whole litany of issues that I think the community cares about. I mean, when we started in 2020, we started with the with the premise or the understanding that the rent was too damn high.
Indeed.
Right?
Still is.
Here it is 2024 and the rent is still too damn high. So I know that's something that's of grave concern to a lot of people. I'm really interested to see, like the city of Albany, and I would like to see what's happening in the city of Albany, happening in the city of Schenectady when it comes to addressing issues with property owners and definitely issues with these ever increasing rents. Yeah. Right. I remember the city of Kingston not too long ago, a couple years back, actually had proposed to reduce rents to something more stable and something more fitting for the community, something the community could afford. And I think they reduced rents like 30%.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It was really really something that was needed.
Right.
And that happened because a lot of folks out of New York City, people with money, were just flooding to upstate New York and buying up properties and then therefore shooting the rents up high. So that's one thing I know for sure.
I mean, also around housing is the good cause legislation, right? Yes. So the idea that you cannot be kicked out of your apartment without good cause. So what this means essentially is that if someone is in good standing, they're paying the rent on time, the property is being taken care of, they entered into a business contract with the property owner to say, I'm going to rent this property, that when the renewal comes up, it's really an automatic. Like, yes, we're gonna keep renting. Unless there are, certain stipulations, it still means that the person is not allowed to just trash the apartment.
Yeah.
Because we have heard property owners say, "Oh, and then I've got to keep the bad tenant." No, the law still exists. that you could take someone to court, as they already do, and say, this person has damaged my property, and I need them to be evicted. So the eviction process does not change for lack of payment or damage of property. But it can't just be, I don't feel like renting to you anymore, so I'm not gonna. Or the other piece that you were talking about that isn't really a part of this legislation, but raising the rent by some ridiculous amount of money, which is something else to look at as well.
And we got a ton of work still to do in housing, and I know that's we got other things to talk about, but I would just say it's really, housing is such it's not, for instance, like merchandising, like selling clothes or selling hats or whatever, being in business that way. Being in business, a key pillar of someone's life, deserves this type of attention, and it needs more balance between property owner and a person renting that property. So
I did an interesting conversation with Phil Steck recently, talking about housing in local communities and some legislation that used to exist that no longer is happening. And I think New York City would understand it, but the idea that could happen in localities is about collective ownership. So imagine if Yates Village or Steinmetz, right? Those renters were investing to become property owners. So it still is that apartment style, but not necessarily.
It's a different investment.
It's a different investment, and it's a possibility, right? So you've got economic stability and investment. You're talking about growing your wealth and being able to pass that on to generations to come. It changes the dynamics, and it's something that doesn't currently exist. The way Phil was explaining it to me, and I'm not even going to try to reiterate it, it used to exist. And so we've got that history, and there's other ways that we can look at ways that will have not just an impact on the housing market, but the economics of a community, which we hear about economics all the time in the community. Do we not?
All the time.
All the time. Poor folks are not really interested in staying poor.
Unfortunately, it's very expensive being poor.
It is.
And that's the whole point about having an investment versus just paying for a service. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
and then I guess the other community issue that I feel we hear a lot about is safety. We did the Black Freedom Project survey back in 21-22, asked hundreds of Black folks specifically in the survey, the only of its kind that we've been able to find for the city of Schenectady, that intentionally targeted the Black community and said, what does safety mean to you? And folks, the top of the list was housing, food, and jobs, I think.
Okay.
And I believe education came in fourth. And it was a question of safety. Which of these things is most important to your safety? And that's where it came. And last on the list, do you remember who was last on the list?
Yeah, I certainly do. It was law enforcement.
It was law enforcement.
Yeah.
Law enforcement was last.
It really was like, it wasn't that people said they didn't want law enforcement or need law enforcement, but when it came to investing money that, and from their city, all these other things took priority.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, and actually, and that thing wasn't unique to the city of Schenectady.
No, not at all.
That survey was done in several other cities, and it was very, very similar results. People had other ideas that about safety and what keeps people safe and where investment should go beyond just working with law enforcement, investing in law enforcement. So, other things. So,
yes. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the next thing that, that's, I think, a community concern, and it's definitely speaking to the hundreds of people that showed up at city council meetings over the last several months, speaking or requesting, demanding, asking, etc., for city council to create a resolution around Free Palestine and a ceasefire.
Yeah.
In Palestine, more individuals, more residents showed up last week.
Yeah.
And soon this week. And yeah, I know, right? Like where we at. And made their voices heard once again. And now we have something called the People's Resolution.
Yes.
We're asking individuals to sign it.
Yep.
Sign the petition. It's going around. You can find it on our page.
Yep.
It's an opportunity for you to have your voice heard on this subject. and the city council members couldn't come together collectively yet. I'm still holding out hope that maybe down the line they will, but the people will take it from here. The people's resolution, y'all. Listen, it's an opportunity to have your voice heard. We want to get as many thousands of people as we can to sign that petition from the city of Schenectady. So watch it on our page. I think Jamaica just shared it.
I did. I just dropped the link.
Yeah, just shared the link. It's really something that we came up with collectively with other members of the community. Say, you know what, we can't get it from here. We'll do it ourselves.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I wish I would have mentioned at the last city council meeting is that it's the people's resolution because it was created by the people.
Yeah.
Not because the expectation is, oh, we're just going to do this. No, we wrote this resolution and have the expectation that our representatives will still at some point move it forward, that they will recognize all of the evidence that has been presented to them for months about why it is in the interest of the city of Schenectady to pass this people's resolution, including the billions of dollars that has been spent on bombs that could have been used investing in the community needs we have here. So yeah, looking forward to, I think we're at, 100 and something petition signatures, hasn't even been a week yet. If folks are interested in helping get the word out, reach out.
Yeah, that's right.
We're here for it because the community voice is what's needed. There is a lot of outside influence, and it has a local impact, which is, literally what we're talking about next.
Well, elections.
That are impacted indeed by
elections.
That. Yeah.
Elections. So Tuesday, primary day, voting day. We saw some very interesting results across the state. We'll start with congratulations to Gabriela Romero and her primary win. We know Gabriela. We've known her for a few years. She's always been a supporter of justice and the work that was happening in Albany and Schenectady and around the capital regions. Working Families Party, and candidate, and really did her thing, and she got a ton of support, and it's really I think deserved. And I can't wait to see what happens when she's elected in November.
Assemblywoman,
yes, Gabriela Romero. So special shout out.
That's going to be
to that team. Yeah, they did a really great job, and a lot of their supporters are people that we know.
Yes,
very happy for them. Next up,
Jamal Bowman.
Okay, yeah, Jamal Bowman.
Let's just jump to Jamal Bowman because I think it is one of those.
But anyway, this is Jamal Bowman, definitely.
I quickly want to say I actually don't want to talk about the DA race.
Really?
I don't.
Okay.
Other than to say DA Soares lost his primary. Period. I don't think that race is worth having a conversation. We could talk about why another time. I think Jamal Bowman and how that race was won and who won that race. And I don't mean the person, I mean the influence. Because it is something that is also at play as part of the presidential election. We see it with, there is outside influence and it then has a local impact. Jamal Bowman was someone who talked about the need for investment in communities and why we should divest from giving bombs to Israel and, have peace and end violence and lots of positive things. And he was well liked and well known. More than $15 million was spent by one special interest group. So one special interest group spent more than $15 million to say, we don't want that person to represent that locality at the federal level. And the special interest group is a foreign special interest group. Let us begin.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So just to give a little background, Jamal Bowman, two-time elected legislator from the Westchester area,
Right.
Just a little bit of the Bronx, whatever. You know, two-term incumbent, was challenged because of his views on what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in West Bank, what's happening in Palestine, period. And he called it out for what it was, and he called it a genocide, and he offended because of that. Because of his call for justice, there was tons of money raised against him in this primary to support Latimer, who is being quote unquote called a Israeli supporter, centrist Democrat, and now he's won the primary, and Bowman is technically out of the running. We'll see if he does a write-in campaign. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's a huge deal because here's the thing: AIPAC, which is the organization that we're talking about, who spent, who raised all this money for the challenger in this race, is, for all intents and purposes, a foreign entity. Funded and sponsored by Israel.
They represent Israel
to support candidates who
support Israel.
Which
is a foreign country. Israel is not a part of the United States of America.
No.
When Russia was accused of interfering with our elections, was anybody happy about it?
We had investigations. We had all kinds of hearings at Congress. We had people questioned. We had all kinds of things happening around Russian influence.
The insinuation, right? It wasn't blatant. I mean, depending on where you sit, some folks felt it was blatant, right?
Yeah.
But this idea that Russia was somehow meddling and trying to influence who was going to be elected was a huge deal. Democrats were in an uproar. Oh my gosh, we can't believe this is happening. And, Republicans were denying it. No, that's not what's happening. So it was a very public conversation. But we just watched an Israeli lobby group, pardon me, spend $15 million against a U.S. congressional member.
Now, they said it was the largest amount ever raised in that race.
Ever spent.
Right, ever spent in that race. So it's and then you have to think that they didn't just raise, that's Bowman's race. Like, you had other races across the country.
Correct.
To where AIPAC had invested dollars in order to get their candidates elected. So it's a huge influence.
And there are lists of how much money each candidate has received from this Israeli lobby group that has been actively working in the United States. This isn't new. This isn't like yesterday AIPAC showed up as a lobby group. They have existed, which is why there are millions of dollars across how many, different races within the United States, from presidential, congressional, Senate, and even state races, to influence who is sitting in a seat that is supposed to represent the citizens of the United States, right? That's what the role and responsibility is supposed to be in our interests, which Republicans actually typically stand up and say, we need to worry about America first, right?
Yeah.
That's one of their talking points. America first. We're worried about America first, unless it's in somehow their best interest. We've got a couple folks that are online. Morning, y'all. Appreciate y'all showing up. And it seems that folks disagree about, whether or not Bowman should have been in the race. And one of the questions, and I'm happy for us to answer it, is why do we care about Israel or Palestine when U.S. vets are dying in the streets? Shall I go first or you?
Sure, you.
So I find it interesting, and this has happened before, that folks will bring up and say, nobody's worried about the vets. We shouldn't be taking care of this other group of people. That other group of people was never a threat to the veterans of the United States. And the issue being that decisions are made about how money is spent every single day. And instead of recognizing that we are the wealthiest nation in the world, and when those in power have the motivation to spend money, they do. So the same motivation that all administrations have had, right? Because Israel has been receiving $3 billion a year for decades. Those vets needed that money back then too, right? And so the ability to actually spend money on all of the residents here in the United States, we're capable, but it is a choice based on who is benefiting. So those individuals that have investments in military weaponry, war is profitable. The people that make money every time we spend military aid, either on our forces or sending bombs to Israel to murder civilians, someone made a profit from that, and they prioritize the profit of the millionaires and billionaires over the veterans, right? And so
you haven't said nothing wrong yet.
The thing that I would say to the individual that says, we have vets dying in the streets, is that we have too many people who go without their basic needs, including U.S. veterans, who should not have ever had to sacrifice their lives the way that they did to benefit those already in power who profit from their pain and from the PTSD that they now have and from being homeless. They sacrificed in wars that have long been established as not necessary. It was warmongering for the purposes of profit. And so those veterans should have very well been home with their families. How many other jobs could they have been in providing for their families? And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, because the way that the military tends to exploit our poor and marginalized communities to put those young people on the front lines and then abandon them once they come home is absolutely disgraceful. But yeah, I don't like the idea that, oh, we shouldn't support Israel or Palestine because of this. It's the battle that we get in at the local, state, and federal level all the time. This false narrative of a lack of resources. We have the resources.
Scarcity.
It is not correct. It is not a scarcity of resources. It is lobby groups, big money, including groups like AIPAC, that force and influence how our money is spent. And I hope that answers their question. Did I miss anything?
I mean, I would no. You said a lot, and we're like, so your dad was a vet.
He was.
My stepdad and my family members that are vets, and the idea that if like we're saying, hey, why do we care about Israel and Palestine? Guess where so much of our money is going, right? So like, be honest with you, when you think about if we wanted to take care of our vets, if we just want to isolate vets because there's so many in our community that are suffering in all kinds of ways, but if we just want to isolate vets, all that money could, like you were saying, could be spent on making sure that the soldiers are taken care of after coming through that hell of a traumatic experience. The stories that I heard from so many veterans about the type of care that they get, it's deplorable. Absolutely. Now it's all fun and games, and we're at a an NFL game or basketball game or some event, and we're like Pledge of Allegiance and wave the flag,
which is new.
But the thing is, it's definitely, and it's actually sponsored, right?
Yep, sponsored.
But my thing is that it's all good at those events when those soldiers that are there are kind of used as a symbol of what the best of America is, but they're not even being taken care of, and they haven't been being taken care of for a very, very long time, right? This is not anything new. It didn't happen in 2020. It didn't happen in the 2000s. It's been happening for decades. So that's why, I mean, for any reason, you can say, well, damn, we shouldn't care about that because we're spending too much damn money there. We could be spending it right here.
And it
for
is,
a person that's, if you're focused on vets and not focused on a genocide, because at the same time, there's a genocide happening. And I think that the positioning of the country, the moral compass of the company, of the country tells you a whole lot. Now, if we could be part and parcel of what's happening in Palestine and the genocide there, and that's our moral compass, then it makes sense that we take care of our vets the way we do.
Yes.
Right? Because
Yeah.
because we're run by big business, we're run by corporate America, we're run by lobby interests, we're not run by the people.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
In the ways that we should. So, let's not dig too deep into that, but that's, I think, very important.
Is the outside influence and the local impact, and it crosses all barriers, not just with our vets, but also why we get in conflicts and which conflicts we get into, or that. And when I say we, I'm talking about, those in power, because you and I very well would not say, hey, let's go drop bombs on babies.
Yeah.
I feel very secure in speaking for us in that moment. But that, again, who is making decisions? There are other lobby groups, the NRA, right? They want guns to be accessible. They want that money to be spent on weapons. And then when folks talk about there's all these guns in our communities, they're coming from states that don't have strict gun laws.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, in New York State, all this gun violence, those guns didn't come from New York. They came from Florida. They came from Texas. They came from other places that are heavily influenced by the NRA, which is a huge lobby group that is looking out for its own self-interest, not the lives of individuals, but the profits of its investors.
Yeah.
And so how do we combat this, right? Because we're running low on time. So if we think about, there's these huge lobby groups that every single day are spending millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to either influence individuals who are already in office or to determine who's sitting in office. How is it that those of us that watch a presidential election and go, but they said they were lying to them and they were lying to them, there's the information piece that's hard enough for us to grasp while we're struggling to survive. But what could we do when we're fighting against big money?
I mean, the only thing we have in our arsenal, in fighting against big money interests, is the people.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, it's the people that working collectively that have real power. It's about how do we convince the people that working collectively is how we move forward with anything. We're so caught up, chasing these different categories and titles and who's this and who's that and all of that. When while we're doing all of that, I mean, I think it's almost so such a well-known fact at this point. And maybe it's not well known. Maybe I'm just thinking, maybe I got to check my own bias here, but like that the power is at the top. The money is at the top. Yeah. Right. And we're down here, beefing with each other when the money is, at the top making all the decisions. Right. We could be mad at you, right, or me for us, agitating or making sure these points are being made. But in reality, the people that puts us in these such harsh conditions are the ones we should be addressing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. All right. So
to get there, because it does, I think, seem daunting and overwhelming and hopeless to a lot of folks, especially when I just said $15 million was spent on an electoral race. Yeah. Our local communities can't raise $15 million. So what does that look like? And I've talked about this before, and I think it's a really good example about how we start local. Mm-hmm. Our Schenectady school board race that just happened in May, in which I was reelected. There are more than 35,000 registered voters in Schenectady. Just over 1,000 came out to vote. One city block can decide the election. Yeah. And if you're able to start with that premise of I've got 10 friends that live in my community, and none of us are registered to vote, or some of us are registered, but then we don't go and vote. It's called block voting. You all come together collectively, you find out who the candidates are, and you make a decision. Listen, you know what? Based on the information we have, this person's in our best interest.
Yeah.
You then all go and you vote together, because some elections, especially primaries, have been won with 7, 10, 20 votes. And in democratically held cities, whoever wins the Democratic primary is like 99.99% likely to win the general election. So there is this real opportunity for both local and some state positions to be easily influenced by a smaller number of people in localities, because voter turnout is so low, voter engagement is so apathetic, that we, the people, do have the power to change the trajectory of those that represent us.
Now, the logic of everything you said makes a ton of sense. And I think if you said that to anyone, listening in, I think they could follow the logic, right? Like, yeah, it makes sense if we come together on this thing or that thing. The problem, or one of the problems anyway, is there's a real lack of interest. There's really, like, people aren't paying attention.
Right.
And it's not that, that these things don't matter in their lives in many ways, but there's like, you have all this other stuff going on in my life.
Absolutely.
They're not making the connection between what those things may be and who's in power at the time. Yep. So there's a real lack of interest. So the hurdle, one of the major ones, is getting people interested in voting, and not just off of some emotional thing that happened, but becoming more consistent.
It's a habit.
And just a habit, and like, hey, taking ownership of the community.
Right.
And like, this is my community. These are the things I want to see happen. These are the things I care about, and actually taking action because of it.
Right.
But if we don't, if there's such a lack of interest, how do you get people interested?
And because everyone, the language used to our community members too often is mind your business and only focus on you, which is to our own detriment. This idea of I just take care of me and mine, but you and yours don't live isolated in a silo in your community. Mm. If your neighbor's son gets kicked out of school and he doesn't have an after-school program or support services, you got to worry about Jimmy, throwing rocks to pass the time and break your window. Mm-hmm. It impacts you, right? And this is a simple thing, and that it is all of us, right? This organization is called All of Us because it is all of us collectively together. When we are divided and siloed, those who are in power maintain the status quo because we're too busy running separately instead of working collectively together and seeing our shared interest and struggle, and that we have more in common than we have differences. Yeah. That within our own individual identities, as they exist, because somebody mentioned identity politics, which is used, has been corrupted and used wrong. I suggest you Google identity politics, Barbara Smith, learn what it really means and how we do have different impacts based on systems and structures, but collectively we have more in common than we have different. Mm-hmm. And it is possible.
It's a lot of common struggles.
It is.
And some of the greatest movements in the country were collective movements, collective efforts to address change. I think it's evidenced out, throughout the history of this country that working collectively and not working in silos or working in your own space is like, I think of my brother Fred Hampton and what he was able to do in such a short time in his life, of bringing people together. It's always been the greatest idea, but I think Stuart Hall, who's one of my absolute favorite political thinkers, talks about this, especially when we think about race, right? So through science, through logic, whatever, we know that racist doesn't really exist. It's
correct.
It's a distinction that's been used to abuse a type of hierarchy, right? Yeah. Like who's better, who's worse, yep. etc., and to highlight differences. And it says, though we know this, and we can kick race out the front door, it sneaks its way back through the back window because it's so prevalent in the country and in Western thought period that it's almost like a base reaction when it comes to how you deal with people, and you have to work with a lot of effort and work consistently in order to not think in those ways or react in those ways, I think, and all of us for a reason.
All of us, because the most dangerous the most dangerous weapon to those in power is our collective work together. And that includes, because the Black Panther Party, and I know we got to close out, but it was white Appalachians, Latinos, Black folks all coming together because they had a shared interest and understanding based on poverty, police brutality, housing insecurity, and economic need. They understood their shared commonality, the same way that I'm able to sit here today, the product of a Black man from Richmond, Virginia, and a white woman from Hoosick Falls, New York. Both of them grew up on farms, understood what poverty was. And while there were differences in their lived experiences, there was that shared commonality. And so here we are with that same opportunity today to recognize that Flint, Michigan mothers met with Hoosick Falls mothers because they both had poisoned water. And the people that benefited was big business and corporations. And when they came in that room together, it was a beautiful thing because they understood we are in this together. And while the world tries to separate us, we will fight for our children, our babies, and our families to have clean water. I mean, that's what we'll continue to do as we every Friday show up. Next Friday, we'll be here at 8:00 though.
Next Friday, we'll try to be here at 8:00. We'll do our best.
We'll be here at 8:00 as long as there's not a presidential debate that is a whole bunch of nonsense without any fact checking.
Yeah. So we're going to take off. I just want to shout out everyone that tuned in, listen to this conversation, whether you listen now, you listen later. It's always appreciated. We need a media platform to discuss the things that our community is talking about from the perspective of our communities.
Absolutely.
It's really important, I think, to give people different angles to think about all this. And we ain't even talk about, and we're not going to talk about it. We ain't even really get into the Trump-Biden thing that happened yesterday. Maybe we'll follow up next week.
Let's just say that it wasn't fact-checked live on air. And please, if you watch it, also watch the follow-up that fact-checks the things that both candidates
said. I just want, are we doomed? Like, seriously, is it a doomsday event? I know we got a Trump supporter in that's been paying attention. And I just look at, Biden, Trump. Wow.
These are our choices.
Wow.
Actually, they're not our only choices. And we should have a conversation about the electoral process and where we are with this dual system of parties and how it does or doesn't benefit us. Because we need to be civically engaged, civically aware, and challenged to continue to think. All right. So that's what we're going to do. And everybody have a good day, regardless of your political stance, because it takes all of us.